At the family party, my daughter screamed, "The $2.5 million is for your brother. You're worthless." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for just a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I only ask that you hit the like button and subscribe. You'll be helping me continue to get this off my chest. My name is Grace Miller. I'm 74 years old. And that night in New Jersey, I understood that I had raised 3 snakes instead of children. Daniel's living room glittered under the chandeliers I helped pay for when he was still living in a studio apartment in the Bronx. The Italian leather furniture, the giant flat-screen TV, the silk curtains that cost more than 6 months of my Social Security checks, all paid for with my money. The money I earned cleaning the houses of the rich in Scarsdale for 30 years, kneeling on marble floors until my knees creaked like old wood. There I was, sitting in a corner near the bathroom, wearing my only good dress, the cream one with little blue flowers I'd saved for special occasions for 5 years, watching my 3 children celebrate my granddaughter Sophia's birthday without including me in their conversations, as if I were just another piece of furniture, as if I were a burden they tolerated out of obligation. Daniel, my eldest, strutted through his living room like a peacock, bragging to the guests about his new construction company, the same company I financed by emptying my savings account 2 years ago, when he swore on his father's grave that he'd pay me back every dollar with interest. The only interest I ever saw was the one he showed in my money. Catherine, my middle child, had greeted me with a cold kiss on the cheek, the kind given out of social duty, while checking her phone as if expecting something more important than the presence of the woman who gave birth to her. She wore a black dress that cost more than my monthly rent, paid for, as I later found out, with the loan I gave her for a medical emergency that turned out to be a nose job. And Lucy, my baby, my youngest daughter, the one who cried and begged me to buy her first car because all her friends had one, now looked at me with the contempt reserved for the poor who dare to breathe the same air as the successful. The grandchildren ran between the adults, their laughter filling the space while I remained invisible in my corner. Sophia, the birthday girl, was wearing a princess dress I had given her, though none of my children had bothered to mention it when she asked who it was from. It appeared by magic, Catherine had said with a cold smile. The table was overflowing with delicacies, charcuterie boards with imported prosciutto, artisan cheeses from Vermont, oysters flown in from the West Coast, and Napa Valley wines that cost more than my weekly pension. Everything was elegantly arranged to impress the neighbors and friends my children had invited to show off their new prosperity, the prosperity they built on my aching back and my cracked hands. On the walls hung silver-framed photographs, memories of family vacations I was never invited to, college graduations I paid for by selling the jewelry my late husband had given me, weddings where they sat me at the back table with the distant relatives no one wanted near the main party. The aroma of roasted lamb mingled with the expensive perfume of the women present, creating an atmosphere of abundance that contrasted painfully with the reality of my empty refrigerator in the small apartment in Flushing, Queens, where I'd lived alone ever since I sold the family home to finance my children's projects. I vividly remembered that day, 3 years ago, when Daniel showed up at my door with tears in his eyes and a folder full of papers. "Mom, if you don't help me, I'm going to lose everything. The company, the house, your grandchildren's future. I just need you to sell the house and lend me the money. I promise, in 2 years, I'll buy you a better house." I, like the fool I was, signed without reading. I sold the house where I had lived for 40 years, where I raised my children as a single mother after my husband died in a car crash when Lucy was just 2. The house where every corner held memories of sleepless nights when they had fevers, of dinners made from leftovers when money was tight, of birthdays celebrated with homemade cakes because I couldn't afford expensive bakeries. 2 years later, I was still waiting for that better house. What I got was a 500-square-foot studio where my bed and the kitchen table that had belonged to my mother barely fit. But that night at Daniel's house, as I watched my children toast their success without mentioning my name, something began to stir in my chest. A cold rage that had been dormant under decades of sacrifice and maternal obedience. Lucy moved to the center of the room, swaying slightly from the wine, her cheeks flushed with alcohol and excitement. She wore heels that clicked against the hardwood floor like hammer blows against my heart. Her red dress was designer. I recognized it because I'd seen one just like it in a boutique window on Madison Avenue, and probably cost more than my entire wardrobe combined. "Attention, everyone!" she shouted, tapping her glass with a silver spoon until the crystal tinkled like funeral bells. "I want to make an important announcement." The room fell heavy with silence. The guests looked at her with that nervous expectation that arises when someone is clearly drunk and about to say something that will be impossible to forget. As you all know, our grandfather left us a considerable inheritance when he passed away last year. $2.5 million that have been sitting in a trust while we decided what to do with it. My heart began to pound. My father had died without saying a word to me about any inheritance. The legal matters had been handled entirely by Daniel, who had assured me there was nothing of value in Grandpa's papers. Well, we've decided. All the money is going to Daniel, because he's the only one who's done something of value with his life, the only one who truly deserves to be called a descendant of Grandpa Miller. Her eyes landed on me with a coldness that chilled my blood. "And just so everyone here is clear, especially her," she pointed a finger at me as if I were an annoying stranger, "Mom doesn't get a single cent, because after all these years of supporting her, of putting up with her drama, of pretending we care, it's time to be honest, she's worthless." The world stopped. The murmurs ceased. Someone coughed uncomfortably. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, the same one I had given them for their wedding, bought with money I'd saved working double shifts at the Mendoza's house. Catherine began to applaud slowly, a cruel smile gracing her blood-red lips. Finally, someone says it. I'm tired of pretending we owe her anything. She did her job as a mother. Now she can fend for herself. Daniel, my firstborn, the one who promised to take care of me when I was old, stood up too. For a moment, I thought he was going to defend me. Instead, he raised his glass. A toast to honesty. It was about time we set the record straight. I felt something inside me collapse, like an old house finally giving way under the weight of too many years of neglect. My hands began to shake uncontrollably, and I had to grip the edge of my chair to keep from falling. One of the guests, a blonde woman I didn't know, whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "About time," someone told her. My mother-in-law is the same way, always demanding attention. The laughter that followed felt like daggers, stabbing one after another into what was left of my dignity. My own children had turned my humiliation into public entertainment, into the joke of the night that their friends would remember for years. I stood up in silence, grabbed my worn patent leather purse, the same one I'd carried to church every Sunday for 20 years, and walked to the door. No one stopped me. No one asked if I needed a ride home. No one seemed to notice that the woman who had sacrificed her youth, her health, and her dreams for them was disappearing from their lives. In the elevator, as the numbers slowly descended to the ground floor, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The scent of roasted lamb still clung to my clothes, a cruel reminder of the abundance from which I had been excluded. But there was something else, something beginning to grow in my chest like a seed in fertile soil. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. For the first time in decades, I saw my children for exactly who they were. Not the adorable kids I had raised with infinite love, but calculating adults who had learned to see me as a resource to be exploited rather than a mother to be honored. That night, when I arrived at my small apartment and sat in the only chair I owned, I knew that something fundamental had changed. The pain was still there, sharp and deep, but it was no longer the pain of surprise. It was the pain of recognition, of finally understanding a truth I had been denying for years. My children didn't love me. Perhaps they never really had. To them, I was an obligation, a burden, a source of resources that was no longer useful now that they had established their own lives and no longer needed my sacrifices. But if they had decided I was worthless, maybe it was time to show them just how much the nothing they thought I was truly worth. I got home that night with the bitter taste of humiliation clinging to the roof of my mouth like rancid honey. The taxi had cost me $20 I didn't have, but walking from Short Hills to Flushing in these borrowed shoes would have been impossible. I had taken them from my late sister Elena's closet because my own had fallen apart last week, and I had no money for a new pair. My apartment smelled of loneliness and stale air. The landlord refused to fix the pilot light on the old stove. "For what you pay in rent, Grace, you should be grateful you have a roof over your head," he'd said the last time I dared to complain. $800 a month for 500 square feet, where the dampness drew maps of non-existent countries on the walls. I sat in the only chair I had. I'd sold the others last year when Catherine asked me for money for the security deposit on her new apartment in Williamsburg, and opened the cookie tin where I kept the photos my children no longer wanted to see. There was Daniel at 3, crying in my arms after falling off the bike I bought him by working extra shifts at the Herrera's house. He had a high fever, and I spent the whole night applying cool cloths to his forehead, singing him the songs my mother used to sing to me. In the photo, his little arms were wrapped around my neck as if I were the only safe thing in the world. When did I stop being his safe harbor and become his ATM? I vividly remembered that day in 1987, when Daniel came home with a bloody nose because some older kids had beaten him up at school. He found me scrubbing the kitchen floor after 12 hours of cleaning the Vasquez mansion in the Hamptons. "Mom, it hurts so much," he sobbed, his little face swollen and his blue eyes clouded with tears. I hugged him with my hands still smelling of bleach and detergent, smudging his school uniform with the grime of a job I hated but needed to keep them fed. I made him hot chocolate with the last of the powder in the pantry and told him stories of brave nights until he fell asleep in my lap. That same night, after putting him to bed, I stayed up until 3 in the morning mending the uniform he had torn in the fight, because buying a new one would mean no meat for 2 weeks. At what point did the boy who fell asleep in my arms transform into the man who had looked at me with contempt that night? I pulled out another photo, Catherine at 18, radiant in her graduation dress. The dress I had sewn myself, working late into the night for a month, copying a design I'd seen in a magazine someone had left behind at the Mendozas. Every stitch had been a promise that my daughter would have something beautiful for her special day, something to be proud of. In the photo, Catherine is hugging me with tears of joy in her eyes. She had gotten a scholarship to study nursing at NYU, something I celebrated as if I had won the lottery. For 3 years, I worked double shifts to send her extra money, so she could eat something better than ramen noodles, so she could go out with her friends once in a while without feeling like the poor girl in the group. Every month I sent her $300 I didn't have, money I scraped together by selling things, taking on extra jobs on weekends, skipping meals so she could live with dignity in her dorm. When she graduated, she promised she would take care of me when I was old. "Mom, you're my hero. When I'm a nurse and making good money, I'm going to give you everything you deserve. I promise." But Catherine never became a nurse. She met Alejandro in her final year, a boy from a wealthy family from Boston, whose parents saw my existence as a stain on their family tree. She married him and dropped out of school to become the perfect wife, as she proudly defined herself. When Alejandro lost his banking job 5 years ago, Catherine came to me for money to maintain their lifestyle. "Just until Alejandro finds something better, Mom. We can't downgrade. The kids are in private school. We have expenses you just don't understand." I gave her my life savings. $15,000 I had scraped together, penny by penny, over 10 years, saved for medical emergencies, or to fix the leaks that appeared in my ceiling every winter. I gave it to her because I believed her tears, because I thought a mother who doesn't help her daughter in need doesn't deserve to be called a mother. She never paid back a single dollar, but she did pay me back with contempt, with curt phone calls when I timidly reminded her of the debt, with elaborate excuses about unexpected expenses that always prevented her from repaying me. Lucy's photo made me smile bitterly. My baby, at 5 years old, dressed as a gypsy for the school festival. I had worked for weeks on that costume, hand-embroidering flowers on the skirt because I couldn't afford to buy one. Every stitch was an act of love, every sequin sewn while she slept, a silent promise that my daughter would be the prettiest girl in the show. In the photo, Lucy is kissing my cheek with those little lips that always tasted like strawberry candy. Her eyes shone with excitement because she was going to dance for the whole school. That same night, After the festival, she hugged me tight and whispered in my ear, "Mommy, when I grow up, I'm going to take good care of you. We're going to live together in a big house with a garden." 20 years later, Lucy called me from Chicago, where she lived with her boyfriend. "Mom, I need you to do me an urgent favor. Miguel and I want to open a restaurant, but we need $50,000 for the down payment. Could you take out a mortgage on your apartment? It would only be for 2 years, 3 at most. Mortgage my apartment. My last refuge. The only place in the world where I could close the door and be myself without having to pretend to be strong for anyone. Lucy, honey, I don't have $50,000. My apartment is worth less than that. And besides, it's the only thing I have left. Mom, this is our chance. Miguel has connections. The business is going to work. I promise you, in 3 years, you'll have your own condo on the beach." Her voice had taken on that sharp, impatient tone she used as a child when she didn't get what she wanted immediately. Besides, what do you need all that space for? You're alone. With the money you'd get from renting out the mortgaged apartment, you could live in a very comfortable retirement home. A retirement home. The word sounded like a death sentence. Places where the elderly go to wait for the end, surrounded by other old people, where family visits become monthly obligations fulfilled with haste and relief when they're over. I can't do that, Lucy. I'm sorry. The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. When she spoke again, her voice was so cold it physically hurt me. Fine, Mom. I get it. You never believed in my dreams. You've always been selfish. Selfish. The word stabbed me in the chest like a dagger. I, who had worked until my fingers bled so she could attend a private Catholic school when all my neighbors sent their kids to public school. I, who dressed in secondhand clothes so she could have new dresses for every birthday. I, who gave up on dating for 15 years because every suitor ran when they found out I came with 3 children as baggage. Selfish. That night, sitting in my kitchen with the photos scattered on the table like cards from a cruel tarot deck, I began to remember with painful clarity every sacrifice I had made, every no I had said to myself so I could say yes to them. I remembered the Christmases where I ate canned soup so they could have turkey, the summers where I stayed in a sweltering Queens while they went to the beach with the money I gave them so the kids could see the ocean, the illnesses I ignored to avoid spending money on doctors because that money was better invested in their needs. I especially remembered Christmas Eve of 1995, when Catherine was 15 and tearfully asked for a pair of Prada shoes she had seen at Saks. "Mom, all my friends have them. If you don't buy them for me, I can't go to the New Year's Eve party. They'll make fun of me." I sold my wedding ring to buy her those shoes, the ring my husband had placed on my finger 25 years earlier, promising me eternal love. I took it to a pawn shop on the Lower East Side where they gave me $300 for the gold that had witnessed my wedding vows. Catherine wore the shoes exactly once. I found them months later at the back of her closet, covered in dust and forgotten. But what hurt the most wasn't the wasted shoes. It was the memory of her face when I gave them to her. I didn't see gratitude. I saw satisfaction, as if it were only natural for me to shed my most precious possessions to satisfy her whims. I had seen that same expression on her face at the party that night, when she humiliated me in front of strangers. The expression of someone who had finally found the courage to say out loud what she had been thinking for years. In the silence of my kitchen, surrounded by the photos of children who no longer existed because the adults they had become were cruel strangers who shared their faces, I made a decision that would change everything. I searched the drawer where I kept important papers and pulled out an envelope that had been there for months, unopened. I had received it from my father's lawyer after his funeral, but Daniel had assured me it was just worthless legal formalities. With trembling hands, I broke the seal and read the first few lines. My world tilted again, but this time it wasn't from pain. This time, it was from understanding. The document trembled in my hands like a dry leaf in the wind. The words blurred through the tears I couldn't hold back, but what I read was so clear it seemed to be written in fire on the paper. Last will and testament of George Miller. I hereby bequeath to my daughter, Grace Miller, the sum of $2,500,000, deposited at Chase Bank, Fifth Avenue branch, under the account number listed in the attached appendix. $2.5 million, The exact amount Lucy had announced that night, the same inheritance my children had decided to divide among themselves without consulting me, believing I knew nothing. The inheritance that Daniel had hidden for a whole year, forging documents, manipulating legal processes, stealing what my father had intended for me. I shot up so fast that the chair toppled over onto the cracked linoleum floor. The sound echoed in the silence of my kitchen like a gunshot, but I didn't bother to pick it up. I walked to the small mirror hanging by the door, the same one I had looked into every morning for 3 years, preparing myself for another day of invisibility and contempt. The woman looking back at me had reddened eyes, disheveled gray hair, and sunken cheeks of someone who had been eating only once a day for months. The wrinkles around my eyes told the story of too many sleepless nights, worrying about children who had learned to see me as a nuisance. But there was something different in those eyes, a spark that had been extinguished for years, buried under layers of resignation and sacrifice. It was rage, yes, but it was something more. It was the awakening of a woman who had just discovered she had been living a lie. I read the document again, this time focusing on every line, every legal clause. My father had been specific. The money was for me alone, in recognition of a life of sacrifice and devotion that deserves to be rewarded. He had also included a personal letter, written in his shaky, elderly hand, but with words as firm as rock. Grace, my daughter, I know your children don't value you as they should. I've seen how they treat you when they visit me, how they talk about you as if you're a burden. That's why I've decided this money is to be yours alone. Don't tell anyone until after I'm gone, and when that time comes, use it to live with the dignity you always denied yourself to give it to them. The tears fell onto the paper, but they were no longer tears of pain. They were tears of recognition, of validation, of knowing that at least one person in the world had seen my worth when I myself had stopped seeing it. My father had died in January. It was now September. For 8 months, Daniel had handled all the legal paperwork, assuring me that he would take care of everything so I wouldn't have to worry about complicated matters. For 8 months, he had been robbing me. The phone rang, cutting through my thoughts like an alarm bell. Catherine's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated to answer, but something told me I needed to hear what she had to say. Mom, her voice was sickeningly sweet, like poisoned honey. I hope you weren't too upset about tonight. You know how Lucy gets when she drinks. She didn't mean it. A lie. Everything in Lucy's tone that night had been deliberate, calculated, true. The words she had spoken had been brewing in her heart for years. Catherine, I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. Did you know about Grandpa's inheritance? A long silence on the other end of the line. Too long to be innocent. What inheritance, Mom? Grandpa didn't have any money, just debts and old papers. The $2.5 million that Daniel is getting. That inheritance. Another pause. I could hear her husband, Alejandro, talking in the background, but Catherine had muffled the receiver. When she spoke again, the mask of sweetness had completely fallen away. Look, Mom, I don't know where you got that information, but you'd better not go around making up stories. Daniel is handling Grandpa's estate because he's the only one of us who understands that stuff. If there's any money, he'll know what to do with it. And what about me? Don't I have a right to know what my own father left behind? Catherine laughed. A dry, cruel laugh that reminded me of my late mother-in-law, that bitter woman who had always treated me as if I were beneath her son. Mom, please, what are you going to do with that much money? Buy party dresses to go where? Take a trip by yourself? It's better off in the hands of someone who knows how to invest it, make it grow, use it for something productive. Something productive. Like Daniel's house that I helped finance. Like Catherine's car that I paid for when hers broke down. Like Lucy's master's degree in Chicago that cost $20,000 of my savings. Productive. Like supporting you all these years, I muttered. But she had already hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand, listening to the dial tone like a funeral dirge. A WhatsApp message from Daniel popped up on my screen. Mom, Catherine told me you're confused about some of Grandpa's papers. I'll come see you tomorrow to clear things up. Don't worry about things you don't understand. Don't worry about things you don't understand. as if I were a senile old woman incapable of comprehending the legal maneuvers he had used to steal from me, as if being 74 had automatically turned me into a child who needed others to make decisions for her. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen, rereading the will over and over, memorizing every word, every clause, every detail that proved my children had been lying to me for months. At dawn, as the first rays of sun filtered through the worn curtains I had inherited from my sister, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. I looked in the phone book for the number of a lawyer, not just any lawyer. The most expensive one I could find, one of those who advertised family law and estates with offices in Midtown Manhattan. When the receptionist answered, my voice was steadier than it had been in years. "Good morning. I need an urgent appointment. I have to sue my own children for theft and fraud, and I have the proof." The woman on the other end of the line seemed surprised, as if it weren't every day that elderly mothers called to take legal action against their offspring. "Could you give me some more details, ma'am?" "Grace Miller, and I'll give the details to the lawyer. When can he see me?" "This afternoon at 4, if that works for you." "Perfect. I'll be there." I hung up the phone and realized I was smiling. I hadn't truly smiled in months, just those fake grimaces I made when my children visited to ask for something else. This was a real smile. Dangerous. Determined. Daniel was coming this afternoon to clear things up, but I would have my own clarifications ready for him. I took a cold shower because the water heater had been broken for 2 months, and I had no money to fix it. I dressed in my best clothes, a navy blue suit I had bought on sale 5 years ago, combed my hair carefully, and put on the pearl earrings my mother had given me for my 50th birthday. If I was going to face my children, I would do it with dignity. Before leaving, I took one last look at the photos scattered on the table. The smiling children in those pictures had died years ago, replaced by adults who had inherited my features, but none of my values. I put the photos back in the tin and closed the lid. Some memories were better left buried. The bus that took me to Manhattan was full of young people in a hurry, executives checking their phones, students with heavy backpacks filled with books and dreams. I was the only old woman, the only one traveling without haste, with no urgent destination other than to reclaim what had been stolen from me. A teenager gave me her seat with a shy smile. "Here, ma'am, please sit," she said with a courtesy my own children had forgotten to show me. I thanked her with a smile that came from the soul, moved by the kindness of a stranger. If a girl on the bus could treat me with more respect than my own flesh and blood, maybe the problem wasn't my age or my uselessness. Maybe the problem was that I had raised monsters. When I arrived at the lawyer's offices, an elegant building on Park Avenue with mirrored elevators and a marble reception, I felt small but not intimidated. I had endured too many recent humiliations for one more to affect me. What I didn't know was that this afternoon, I wouldn't just be reclaiming my inheritance. I would discover that my children had been planning something much worse. The lawyer, Robert Castillo, had that air of competence that only comes from decades of sustained success. His office was decorated with mahogany-framed diplomas and photos of him shaking hands with politicians and businessmen I recognized from the news. When I finished telling him my story and showed him the original will, he leaned back in his Italian leather chair and looked at me with a mixture of respect and astonishment. "Mrs. Miller, in 30 years of practice, I've seen many cases of elder abuse, but this is aggravated fraud, document forgery, and embezzlement. Your children could face criminal charges." His words floated in the air-conditioned office like divine judgments. Criminal charges. My children, the same ones I had nursed, comforted through nightmares, and defended against unfair teachers and gossiping neighbors, could end up in prison for what they had done to me. "What do you want to do?" he asked, adjusting his glasses with a gesture that suggested he already had a strategy forming in his legal mind. "I want to get back what's mine, and I want them to know that I am no longer the woman they can walk all over whenever they please." I left that office with documents that made me a millionaire, and a plan that would bring me justice, but also with a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. Daniel had begun his campaign of manipulation before I even got home. My WhatsApp was filled with messages that grew progressively more desperate. "Mom, where are you? We need to talk urgently. Mom, A neighbor saw you getting into a taxi on Park Ave. What were you doing there? Mom, answer the phone. We need to talk now. When I finally got to my apartment, Daniel was waiting for me on the landing. His black BMW, paid for with my inheritance, was parked illegally on the street, taking up 2 spots with the arrogance of someone who had forgotten what it was to follow the rules. I saw him before he saw me. He was nervous, pacing in front of my door like a caged animal, talking on the phone to someone in a tone I couldn't hear but which seemed agitated from a distance. When he saw me climbing the stairs, he hung up immediately and rushed toward me with that fake smile he had perfected over years of asking me for money. Mom, I've been waiting for you. Where have you been? You had me worried. Worried. The man who hadn't called me in 3 weeks, who had forgotten my birthday 2 years in a row, who hadn't bothered to visit when I had the flu for a month, was now worried. I was taking care of some business, I replied, fumbling for my keys in my purse without looking him in the eye. What business, Mom? You don't have any business. I handle everything important. I opened the door and went inside. He followed me without asking, filling my small space with his imposing presence and his expensive cologne that smelled of betrayal. Sit down, son, I said, pointing to the only remaining chair. We need to talk. Daniel sat, but his posture was tense, defensive. His dark eyes, so much like his father's, studied me as if I were a problem he needed to solve quickly. Mom, before you say anything, I want to explain something. Grandpa's inheritance. It's complicated. There are legal issues, taxes, investments that a person like you can't handle. A person like me? You know what I mean. You're older. You don't understand modern finance. It's better if I manage everything and give you a monthly allowance. That way you don't have to worry about a thing. An allowance. As if I were his retired housekeeper instead of his mother. And how much would this generous allowance be? $500 a month. More than enough for your expenses. $500 out of $2.5 million. A pittance that represented less than 0.3% annually of what was legally mine. Daniel, I said, pulling the will out of my purse. Have you ever seen this document? His face changed instantly. The mask of false concern crumbled, revealing the panic he had been hiding underneath. Mom, where did you get that? From where it should have been all along. In my hands. He shot up, beginning to pace my tiny kitchen like a caged lion. You don't understand the legal implications. If you claim that inheritance now, there will be problems with the IRS, investigations, complications that could affect the whole family. The family that publicly told me I was worthless yesterday. Lucy was drunk. She didn't mean it. And you? When you toasted to her honesty, were you drunk too? Daniel was speechless for the first time in years. I watched him struggle internally, calculating which strategy would work best to maintain control over my money. Okay, Mom. You're right to be upset. But think about it. What are you going to do with all that money at your age? Wouldn't it be better to secure your grandchildren's future? Wouldn't you rather know that your sacrifice was for something great? My sacrifice. 40 years of sacrifice that he was reducing to an investment in his own comfort. Just then, the phone rang again. This time it was Lucy, calling from Chicago. Daniel made desperate gestures for me not to answer, but I picked it up. Mom? Lucy's voice sounded different, more calculated. I've been thinking about last night. Maybe I was a little harsh. Why don't you come to Chicago for a few days? Miguel and I can host you, show you the city. What for, Lucy? So we can talk. So you can see how well the restaurant is doing. So you can understand why it's important for Grandpa's money to be invested in serious businesses and not be wasted. Daniel stared at me with pleading eyes, mouthing for me to refuse the invitation. But I was curious to see just how far they were willing to go. All right, I'll come next weekend. When I hung up, Daniel exploded. Mom, you can't go to Chicago. Lucy is going to fill your head with crazy ideas. She's going to convince you to do stupid things with your money. Your money. After months of telling me there was no money, he now acknowledged that it existed and that it was mine. Daniel, I think it's time for you to leave. I'm not leaving until we sign an agreement. Until you see reason. That's when I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Power. The power to throw someone who was disrespecting me out of my own home. The power to slam the door in the face of the person who had been stealing from me. Get out of my house right now, or I'm calling the police. You're going to call the police on me? On your own son? On the thief, who happens to be my son. Daniel froze. I saw in his eyes the exact moment he understood that he had lost control over me, that the submissive, manipulable mother he had known his whole life had died that morning in the lawyer's office. He left, slamming the door so hard it shook the walls of my small apartment. From the window, I watched him get into his car, talking animatedly on the phone, probably alerting his sisters that the manipulation operation had failed. That night, for the first time in months, I had a decent meal. I went down to the Key Food on the corner and bought prosciutto, artisan cheese, stuffed olives, and a bottle of red wine from California. I spent $30 without a second thought, without calculating if it would last me the rest of the month. I put music on the radio, Aretha Franklin singing Respect, and set the table with the lace tablecloth my grandmother had made. I lit the scented candle I had been saving for a special occasion that had never seemed special enough. As I ate, I toasted by myself with the wine glass. To Dad, I said to the empty room, who knew me better than my own children. The wine tasted like freedom, like justice, like reclaimed dignity, but I knew this was only the beginning. My children wouldn't give up easily. They had built their lives on the foundation of my submission, and they weren't going to accept that foundation being gone without a dirty fight. The phone rang all night. Catherine, Daniel, Lucy, even my daughter-in-law Patricia. WhatsApp messages that became progressively more threatening, more desperate, more revealing of who they truly were when they didn't get what they wanted. But I didn't answer a single one. For the first time in 74 years, the phone was ringing for me, and I was deciding when to answer. That feeling of control was intoxicating, and tomorrow, when I went to the bank to claim my account, the war would truly begin. On Monday morning, I went to the Chase Bank on Fifth Avenue with the will under my arm and my heart pounding like a war drum. The branch was imposing, with its high ceilings and marble columns that made people with millionaire accounts feel important, and people like me, who until that day had lived on meager pensions, feel small. The manager, a bald man in his 50s in a suit that cost more than my annual rent, received me with the professional courtesy reserved for clients who have just inherited fortunes. When he reviewed the documents, his expression changed from commercial cordiality to genuine surprise. Mrs. Miller, the account has indeed been in your name for 8 months, but we have received several inquiries from a Mr. Daniel Miller who identified himself as your legal representative. What kind of inquiries? Attempts to access the account, transfer requests. He even brought a power of attorney that our legal department determined was forged. Forged. My son had been trying to access my money with fake documents for months. It wasn't just negligence or misunderstanding. It was a planned criminal operation. Can I withdraw some money today? Of course. How much do you need? I thought for a moment. For 3 years, I had lived on a $600 monthly pension check, rationing every cent, buying food on sale, dressing in clothes from Goodwill. $50,000. The manager didn't even blink. To him, it was a normal amount. To me, it was more money than I had ever handled in my entire life. An hour later, I walked out of the bank with a new debit card and a sense of power that made me dizzy. I decided to do something I hadn't done in 5 years. Go shopping without looking at the price tags. My first stop was Saks Fifth Avenue. I rode up the escalators feeling like Cinderella on her way to the ball. But this time, the fairy godmother was my own determination. In the women's department, a young sales associate with a warm smile attended to me with genuine kindness. How can I help you, ma'am? I need a completely new wardrobe. Dresses, shoes, coats. Everything a woman my age needs to feel dignified. 2 hours later, I had spent $3,000 on clothes that made me feel like the woman I had been before I became a sacrificial mother. A navy blue wool coat that made me look elegant instead of invisible. Comfortable but beautiful shoes that didn't hurt my swollen feet. Dresses that flattered my figure instead of hiding it under cheap, shapeless fabrics. When I got home, laden with shopping bags, the phone was ringing. This time it was Catherine, and her voice had lost all pretense of sweetness. Mom, what the hell are you doing? Daniel told me you went to a lawyer. Have you lost your mind? Lost my mind for claiming what's mine? That money isn't yours. It's family money. Dad would have wanted it for all of us. Your father died when you were 2, Catherine. You have no idea what he would have wanted. I mean, Grandpa. He loved us all equally. Then why does the will specifically say it's only for me? Silence. A long, heavy silence that confirmed she knew exactly what the real document contained. Mom, listen to me carefully. Her voice was now threatening. If you continue with this nonsense, if you take away what we need to live, you will be completely alone. None of us will ever speak to you again. You will never see your grandchildren again. You will die alone in that hovel. Her words should have terrified me. For years, my greatest fear had been exactly that. Absolute loneliness. Abandonment by my children. Not knowing my grandchildren as they grew up. But something had changed in me over the past 24 hours. The loneliness Catherine threatened me with, I was already living it. My grandchildren already treated me like an annoying stranger when they saw me. My children had already abandoned me emotionally, maintaining only the contact necessary to extract whatever last resources I could provide. Catherine, sweetie, I said with a calmness that surprised even me. I'm already alone. The difference is, now it's by choice. I hung up the phone and unplugged it from the wall. The silence that followed was the most beautiful I had experienced in years. There were no demanding voices asking for sacrifices. No whispered guilt about everything I hadn't done right as a mother. No expectations of self-denial to fulfill. Just silence. And peace. That night, I ate on my new dinnerware. I had bought a complete set of porcelain at Saks, with hand-painted flowers that reminded me of the lavender fields of my childhood in the countryside. I put classical music on the radio, something I could never do when my children visited because that depressing music made them nervous. I poured wine into a real crystal glass, not the plastic cups I had been using to prevent them from breaking if they slipped from my trembling hands. The wine tasted different in crystal. It tasted like a celebration. I toasted alone, raising the glass to the photograph of my parents on the living room table, to Dad, who saw me when they decided I was invisible. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. I didn't wake up every 2 hours worrying about bills I couldn't pay or calls I couldn't avoid. I didn't dream of my young children asking for help. I didn't have nightmares about ending up in a nursing home where no one would visit. I dreamed I was flying. The next day, Tuesday, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I stayed in bed until 10 in the morning simply because I wanted to. Not because I was sick or depressed, but because I could afford to. Because no one was expecting me anywhere. Because for the first time in my adult life, my time belonged entirely to me. I made a real breakfast. Coffee with cream instead of instant coffee with water. Toast with prosciutto instead of dry bread with margarine. Fresh squeezed orange juice instead of tap water. Every bite tasted like freedom. While I ate, I planned my day with the meticulousness of a general preparing for battle. First, I would go to a decent salon to fix this gray hair I had been cutting myself with kitchen scissors for months. Then, I would visit the lawyer to sign the documents that would protect my inheritance from any future family theft attempts. In the afternoon, I would do something I hadn't done in 5 years. I would go to the movies. Alone. Without having to justify to anyone why I wanted to see a romantic comedy instead of staying home waiting for calls from children who only remembered me when they needed something. The phone remained unplugged. From my window, I could see normal life continuing on the street. Mothers taking children to school, retirees walking dogs, delivery guys on bikes bringing food to people who could afford to order it. But I was no longer part of that normal life where mothers sacrifice endlessly for children who take them for granted. I had crossed an invisible but definitive line, entered unknown territory where my needs mattered as much as anyone else's. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating in a way I had never imagined possible. At the salon, when the stylist asked what I wanted to do with my hair, I didn't reply. Whatever is cheapest, as I had for years. Something that makes me feel beautiful, I said. I don't care about the price. The young woman smiled as if she understood exactly what I needed without me having to explain. 3 hours later, I walked out with a modern cut that took 10 years off my appearance, silver highlights that made my blue eyes sparkle, and a smile that made my facial muscles ache from disuse. My reflection in the shop windows surprised me. It was me, but a version of me that had been buried under decades of maternal self-denial. On Friday afternoon, as I was heading to the Amtrak train that would take me to Chicago, I found my 3 children waiting for me at Penn Station. They stood by the entrance to the platforms like a human barricade, dressed in black as if they were going to a funeral. Mine, probably. Daniel held a bouquet of red roses, the same kind he gave me every Mother's Day to accompany his requests for money. Catherine had brought my 2 grandchildren, Paul and Anna, 8 and 10 years old, clearly instructed to act as emotional shields. Lucy's eyes were swollen from crying, but something in her posture told me the tears had been carefully calculated for maximum dramatic impact. "Mom!" Daniel approached with that smile that used to melt my heart, but which I now recognized as the expression of a cornered predator. "You can't just leave like this. We need to talk as a family." "We already talked, son," and it was very revealing. Paul, my eldest grandson, ran to me with those little arms that had always been my weakness. "Grandma Grace, why are you mad at Daddy? Mommy says you don't love us anymore." The dagger struck exactly where Catherine had calculated it would hurt most. Using the children as emotional weapons was her lowest strategy, but also her most effective. For a moment, I felt my resolve waver. Then I remembered all the times I had tried to see these grandchildren and was told they were busy with activities. All the birthday invitations that arrived too late for me to attend. All the times I had bought them expensive gifts that disappeared without a thank you. "Paul, sweetie," I knelt to be at his level. "Grandma loves you very much. But sometimes, grown-ups have to make hard decisions to make things fair." Catherine pulled Paul away by the arm with more force than necessary. "Mom, stop the theatrics. We all know what's happening here. You have senile dementia, and that scumbag lawyer is manipulating you to steal your money. We've spoken to a geriatric specialist, and he says it's very common in people your age." Senile dementia. The accusation hung in the station's air like toxic smoke. Catherine had found the perfect way to discredit any decision I made. Turn me into an incompetent old woman in need of a legal guardian. Did I also have senile dementia when I was working 14-hour days cleaning houses to pay for your whims? I asked with a calmness that astonished me. Or only when I claim what's mine? Lucy stepped forward, her eyes still teary, but with a determination I recognized as inherited from me. "Mom, please, come with me to Chicago. Miguel wants to get to know you better. We can talk calmly, find a solution that's good for everyone." "A solution where I give up my inheritance and you all get to keep it? A solution where you act like the mother you always were, generous, loving, thinking of your children's well-being before your own." There it was, the perfect emotional trap. To be a good mother meant to remain a victim. To love them meant to let them rob me. To be generous meant to hand over my dignity along with my money. "Do you know what my father told me before he died?" I asked them, knowing I was lying but needing to say something that would scar them forever. He said, "Grace, your children will devour you if you let them. Don't let them." The lie came out of my mouth with a conviction that scared me, but it felt more true than any truth I had spoken in years. Daniel finally lost his composure. His mask of the concerned son fell away, revealing the face of fury he had been hiding. "Stop talking nonsense. Grandpa died of Alzheimer's. He didn't even know his own name at the end. But he knew how to recognize a daughter who took care of him for years. And he knew how to distinguish between a loyal daughter and 3 grandchildren who only showed up when they needed money." Catherine stepped so close I could smell her French perfume, the one I had given her for her last birthday using the money I'd saved to fix my heating. "Mom, I'm going to say this only once. If you don't see reason, if you continue with this absurd revenge, you are going to destroy this family. And when you realize what a mess you've made, it will be too late to fix it." "Revenge?" I repeated, feeling the word echo in my chest. "This isn't revenge, Catherine, it's justice." Lucy then exploded, finally revealing her true colors. "Justice? What a big word for a woman who never did anything but clean up other people's filth. Justice would be you admitting that we were the ones who had to put up with a bitter mother who was never able to rebuild her own life. The echo of her voice was lost among the train announcements and the constant rumble of travelers dragging suitcases across the marble floor. Several people had stopped to watch our family scene, some with morbid curiosity, others with obvious discomfort. But I no longer felt shame. Shame had died along with my need for their approval. "You're right, Lucy," I said, adjusting the strap of my new purse on my shoulder. "I never rebuilt my life, because I dedicated my entire life to building yours." I walked toward the boarding gate without looking back. Behind me, I heard Daniel shouting that this wasn't over, Catherine threatening to have me committed, and Lucy sobbing that she had lost her mother. But as I boarded the train and found my seat, first class because I could afford it, something inside me whispered that they hadn't lost a mother. They had lost a victim. The landscape of the Midwest slid past the window as the Amtrak train sped toward Chicago at 100 miles per hour. Golden fields under the September sun, small towns with old churches, infinite horizons that opened before me like promises of freedom. For the first time in decades, I was traveling with no fixed destination. Lucy thought I was coming to visit her, to surrender to her Chicago-style manipulation. But I had other plans. In my purse, I carried the business card of a Chicago real estate agency I had found online. I was going to buy a condo, not necessarily to live there, but to prove to myself that I could make major decisions without asking for anyone's permission. The train stopped in Cleveland. An elegant woman my age got on and sat next to me. We smiled at each other with that instant complicity that arises between women who have lived long enough to recognize the strength in each other's eyes. "Going on vacation?" she asked. "No," I replied, surprised by my own honesty. "I'm going to start a new life." She nodded as if it were the most natural answer in the world. I did the same thing 10 years ago. After 40 years of marriage to a man who treated me like his personal maid. Do you regret it? Only that I didn't do it sooner. When we arrived in Chicago, I said goodbye to my traveling companion with a spontaneous hug. She had given me something I hadn't received in years, the understanding of another woman who had chosen her own dignity over the expectations of others. Lucy was waiting for me on the platform with Miguel, her boyfriend, who smiled with the kind of phoniness that characterizes people who need something from you but don't know how to ask for it directly. "Mama Grace!" Miguel hugged me with theatrical enthusiasm. "We finally get to meet Lucy's mother. We've prepared a special dinner in your honor." A special dinner, the last supper before the execution. But they didn't know that the condemned had decided not to show up to the gallows. We got into his Honda Civic, financed, I later learned, with a loan they hoped to pay off with my inheritance, and headed to Lincoln Park, where they lived in a 2-bedroom apartment that cost more per month than my entire annual Social Security income. During the drive, Lucy pointed out tourist spots with the forced enthusiasm of a guide trying to sell a tour to a reluctant client. "That's the skyline, Mom. Isn't it beautiful? Miguel and I are going to get married there when we have money for a decent wedding." A decent wedding, financed with the money my father had wanted me to have to live out my final years in peace. But this time, I had a surprise prepared for them. In my purse, next to the original will, I carried something that would change everything. The phone number of an investigative journalist from the Chicago Tribune who specialized in cases of elder abuse. If my children wanted to play dirty, I was going to teach them what it really meant to lose. Dinner at Lucy's was a masterpiece of manipulation disguised as family hospitality. Miguel had prepared wild mushroom risotto, my grandmother's secret recipe, he boasted as he stirred the rice with theatrical movements. And Lucy had decorated the table with candles and flowers, as if we were celebrating a reconciliation instead of planning my final surrender. "Mom, isn't the risotto delicious?" Lucy served me wine with suspicious generosity. "Miguel is an incredible chef. The restaurant is going to be a guaranteed success. We just need that little initial help to get started." Little help. $2.5 million reduced to a little help, with the same casualness with which they might ask to borrow $20 for a taxi. "It's very good," I admitted, truly savoring the food for the first time in months. But I didn't come here to talk about business. Miguel and Lucy exchanged a quick glance. They had prepared a whole presentation about the restaurant, Folders with financial projections, photographs of the space they wanted to lease in the West Loop, even testimonials from friends who promised to be regular customers. Of course, Mom. First, let's enjoy dinner. There will be time later to talk about serious things. But I had my own plans for the serious conversation. After dessert, homemade creme brulee that Miguel had prepared with caramelized sugar that crunched between my teeth like golden crystals, Lucy finally launched her main attack. Mom, Miguel and I have been talking, and we want to make you a proposal. She moved closer, taking my hands in hers with that fake intimacy she had perfected for getting favors. Why don't you move to Chicago? We could buy you a beautiful condo near ours. We'd take care of you. We'd spend time together like we used to. As if there had ever been a before where she had taken care of me instead of asking me to take care of her. And in return, she continued, you could invest in the restaurant. You'd be a partner. You'd have a monthly income. You'd be part of something exciting instead of being alone in that sad apartment in Queens. Miguel nodded with rehearsed enthusiasm. Mrs. Miller, you would be like the matriarch of our family business. Your name would be on the sign, Grace's Place. Isn't that beautiful? Grace's Place. My name on a sign, my money in their pockets, my future tied to a business they would completely control, while I became the decorative mascot who justified their appropriation of my inheritance. It sounds tempting, I lied. But before I make any decisions, there's something I want to show you. I took the envelope I had been keeping like a trump card from my purse. Inside were the photos I had secretly taken during my visits to their homes over the last few months. Daniel counting stacks of cash at his desk, Catherine putting jewelry in a safe she shouldn't be able to afford, Lucy signing documents at a notary's office in Chicago. I had taken them with the digital camera my sister Elena gave me before she died, the camera my children thought was too complicated for an old woman to operate. It turned out to be perfect for documenting their crimes. What is this? Miguel took the photos with hands that immediately began to tremble. Evidence, I replied simply, of how you've been spending money that wasn't yet yours. The photos clearly showed Daniel handling wads of cash that exactly matched the dates the bank had informed me of the fraudulent attempts to access my account. Catherine was shown buying the diamond necklace she had worn at the party. On the same day she had told me over the phone she didn't have money to help me with my leaky roof. Lucy was featured in incorporation documents for her company, using my name as collateral without my knowledge. This is... Lucy stammered, her face draining of all color. You were spying on us? I was protecting you. From yourselves. I rose from the table with the elegance my new clothes and hairstyle afforded me. I was no longer the hunched-over old woman who apologized for existing. I was Grace Miller, rightful heiress, a 74-year-old woman who had decided to reclaim her power. Miguel, thank you for dinner. It was delicious. I walked to the door without rushing, savoring every second of their bewilderment. Lucy, honey, I'll see you soon. But not to talk about restaurants. Mom, you can't just leave. We have to sort this out. I stopped at the doorway, my hand already on the doorknob. It's already sorted. Tomorrow at 11 in the morning, there will be a press conference at the Drake Hotel. A journalist from the Chicago Tribune is going to tell the story of an elderly woman from New York whose children tried to steal her inheritance. The documents I have are very interesting, especially the ones that show how Daniel forged my signature on 3 separate occasions. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Miguel had turned pale enough to be a ghost. Lucy had slumped into a chair, staring at me as if she didn't recognize me. You wouldn't dare, Daniel's voice whispered from the phone, because Lucy had put him on speaker at some point. You're our mother. You're not going to destroy your own family over money. I'm not the one destroying it. And it's not about the money. It's about respect. I left the apartment, closing the door softly, without the dramatic slam that would have been less elegant. In the elevator on the way down to the lobby, I looked at myself in the mirror and smiled at the woman looking back. She was beautiful, not with the beauty of youth, but with something more powerful, the beauty of someone who had decided to value herself. That night, I stayed at the Peninsula Chicago, a 5-star hotel on Michigan Avenue where I had never dreamed I could afford a room. The suite had views of the entire city, with enormous windows that framed the illuminated skyline like an impressionist painting. I ordered room service, something I had only seen in movies but never experienced. Smoked salmon, caviar, and French champagne that cost more than my monthly rent. I ate in a white silk robe provided by the hotel, sitting in a velvet armchair in front of those windows that turned Chicago into my private show. Every bite tasted like victory. Every sip of champagne was a celebration of the woman I had decided to become after 7 decades of being who others needed me to be. My cell phone, now turned on because I decided when I was available, rang nonstop all night. Calls from Daniel, Catherine, Lucy, even some distant cousins my children had recruited for their family pressure campaign. But I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I called my new hairdresser in New York. "Hi, it's Grace, your client from yesterday. Could you book me for Monday? I want to completely change the color. Something bold. Something a woman my age isn't supposed to do. How about platinum blonde with purple highlights?" the girl suggested enthusiastically. "Very modern. Very rock and roll." "Perfect. I also want a manicure. Red. Bright red." When I hung up, I realized I was laughing. A real, liberating laugh that came from a deep place in my soul that had been suppressed for decades. The next day, I didn't go to the press conference I had threatened to organize. It was a bluff, one that had worked perfectly to show them that I could play dirty too when necessary. Instead, I went shopping on the Magnificent Mile, had lunch alone at a restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan, visited Millennium Park, and took selfies like any other tourist who had a right to enjoy her time and her money. In the afternoon, when I returned to the hotel, I found a message from my lawyer, Robert Castillo, in New York. Daniel had tried to contest the will, claiming I was suffering from cognitive decline. He had submitted a fake medical certificate and requested a court order to freeze my bank account. But the judge had rejected the petition. Daniel's documents were so obviously fraudulent that the judge had ordered a criminal investigation against him for forging public documents. My eldest son, the boy who had cried in my arms when he had nightmares, was going to be arrested for trying to steal from me. That night, from the terrace of my suite, with Chicago glittering at my feet like a sea of diamonds, I understood something fundamental. I hadn't lost a family. I had gained a life. 6 months later, as I write these lines from the terrace of my new home in Naples, Florida, yes, I bought a house on the ocean with my money. I can see through the purple bougainvillea how the sun sets over the Gulf of Mexico, painting the sky in oranges and pinks that no postcard could ever capture. Daniel was arrested on a gray Tuesday in October. I saw it on the WGN News while eating breakfast in my new dining room, overlooking the garden I'd had planted with jasmine and roses. "Local businessman arrested in family fraud scheme," the headline read. I felt neither satisfaction nor pain, just a strange sense of justice fulfilled, like when you finish a book and understand that the ending was inevitable from the first page. Catherine tried to visit me twice. The first time in November, she arrived in Naples with the children and tears prepared for the occasion. I let them in because I wanted Paul and Anna to see how their grandmother lived when no one was stealing her dignity. "Mom, this is beautiful," Paul said, running through the yard chasing butterflies, while Anna was mesmerized by the pool that shimmered like a sapphire under the Florida sun. Catherine, however, assessed every piece of furniture, every ornament, every luxury detail with the calculating gaze of someone appraising what she believed was hers by birthright. "Mom, this house must have cost a fortune. Don't you think it's too big for one person?" "It's perfect for a person who has finally learned to value herself. But think of the kids, Mom. With this money, they could go to the best schools in the world, have opportunities we never had." The kids. They always fell back on the kids when their other arguments failed. "Catherine, your children are already in private schools that I paid for 2 years. Their opportunities are secure because I made sure of it when you couldn't. But this is different. With this amount, they could go to Harvard, to Oxford. They could be somebody important." Somebody important. As if I had never been important to anyone. As if my entire life of sacrifice had no value beyond serving as a springboard for others' dreams. "Catherine, have you ever asked me what I wanted to be when I was young?" My daughter looked at me, confused, as if the question were so absurd it didn't deserve an answer. "What do you mean?" "Before I became your mother, before I dedicated my entire life to your dreams, I had dreams too. I wanted to study art history. I wanted to travel. I wanted to write a book about the forgotten women of the civil rights movement. Catherine blinked several times, processing information she had apparently never considered relevant. But Mom, that was 50 years ago. You can't do those things now. Why not? Because you're old. Because you don't have time anymore. Because it would be ridiculous. Ridiculous. A 74-year-old woman chasing dreams was ridiculous. But 3 adults robbing their elderly mother was perfectly reasonable. Catherine, I want you to take the children and not come back until you can visit me without asking for anything. If that day ever comes. I watched her leave in her rental car. She had sold the one I paid for to cover the debts she'd accumulated while waiting for my inheritance, taking my grandchildren with her, but leaving behind any pretense of genuine motherly love. Lucy never called me again after Chicago. I heard through the grapevine that the restaurant had closed after 3 months, that Miguel had left her for a younger waitress, that she had moved back to New York to live with a friend because she couldn't afford rent. Part of me, the part that had been a mother for 50 years, felt the urge to call her, to offer help, to rescue her as I had always done. But the new woman who had been born in that lawyer's office knew that rescuing her would mean condemning myself to being a victim again. Instead of calling Lucy, I hired an art history tutor, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a 60-year-old woman who had been a professor at Northwestern University before retiring. She comes to my house twice a week for private lessons on the periods that fascinate me most: the Harlem Renaissance, female artists overlooked by official history, the patrons who funded masterpieces without receiving credit. Grace, Dr. Reed would tell me as we reviewed prints of paintings by Faith Ringgold, it's never too late to feed the soul. Knowledge has no expiration date. In the afternoons, I write. I bought a laptop, the latest model because I could afford it, and began to document not only my own story but the stories of other women who had gone through similar experiences. It turned out that elder abuse was more common than I had imagined. Through a support group I found online, I met Maria, 68, whose children had sold her house while she was in the hospital. Rose, 71, who discovered her daughter had been stealing her pension for 3 years. And Isabel, 76, whose grandchildren had sued her, claiming dementia, when she refused to finance their college whims. We all had something in common. We had mistaken motherly love for self-annihilation. We had raised children who learned to take without giving, to receive without thanking, to see our sacrifice as an entitlement rather than a gift deserving of respect. I decided to use part of my inheritance to create something my father would have approved of: the Grace Miller Foundation for Elderly Women Facing Family Abuse, a place where women like me could find free legal advice, psychological support, and most importantly, the understanding that setting boundaries doesn't make them bad mothers. The opening was in March, in a beautiful space in downtown New York that had been decorated like an elegant living room instead of a cold office. I invited all the women from the support group, the sales associate from Saks who had helped me, the hairdresser who had restored my self-esteem, even Dr. Reed, my art tutor. I did not invite my children, but they showed up anyway. I saw them walk in as I was cutting the inaugural ribbon, dressed in mourning as if they were attending a funeral instead of celebrating their mother's rebirth. Daniel was in handcuffs. He was out on bail, but the criminal proceedings were ongoing. Catherine brought the grandchildren, once again using them as emotional shields. Lucy walked behind them all, thinner, sadder, with the defeated look of someone who had gambled everything on a losing hand. I approached them after the official ceremony, when the cameras were gone and only the women from the group remained, sharing appetizers and wine as if we were lifelong friends instead of survivors of toxic families. "Hello," I said simply. Paul ran towards me, but Catherine stopped him. "We don't know if we can trust you not to hurt them," she said with a bitterness I recognized as inherited from me, from all the years I had spent swallowing resentment instead of expressing it. "I'm not going to hurt them, but I'm not going to let them hurt me either." Daniel looked at me with those eyes that were once my scared little boys. "Mom, is there any way to fix this? Any way to be a family again?" The question contained its own answer. He wanted to go back to being the family where I gave and they took, where I sacrificed and they benefited, where my value was measured by my ability to erase myself for their well-being. "Daniel, We could be a real family, one where we all respect each other, where no one uses anyone, where love isn't bought with sacrifices. I looked him straight in the eye, but that would require you to change, and I don't think you're willing to do that. Lucy approached then, her blue eyes, so much like mine, filled with tears that seemed genuine this time. Mom, do you hate me? The question broke my heart for a moment, but it was no longer the heart of a mother who blamed herself for everything that went wrong in her children's lives. I don't hate you, Lucy. I pity you, because you've spent 35 years waiting for others to solve your life instead of learning to solve it yourself. So what now? Are we just going to be strangers forever? Now you decide what kind of relationship you want to have with me, but it will be a relationship between respectful adults, not between a victim and her tormentors. They left without saying goodbye. I watched them walk away down the street, my 3 children walking together but apart, united by the loss of their emotional ATM, but divided by the guilt of having taken things too far. 3 months have passed since then. Daniel is under house arrest in the condo he bought with my money, awaiting a trial that will likely send him to prison for 2 years. Catherine had to sell her house in Williamsburg and move into a rental in a less fashionable neighborhood. Lucy is still in Chicago, but now she works as a waitress in the same neighborhood where she was going to open her dream restaurant. Paul, my eldest grandson, wrote me a letter 2 weeks ago, a handwritten letter on notebook paper, with the careful handwriting of a child trying to do things right. Grandma Grace, Mom says you hate us now, but I don't believe it. I'm writing because I want you to know that I remember when you taught me how to make scrambled eggs in your old kitchen, and when you took me to Central Park to feed the ducks. Could we do that again someday? Without Mom or Dad, just you and me. That letter is framed on my bedside table, because Paul sees me as a grandmother, not as a source of money. Because at 10 years old, he already knows the difference between genuine love and self-serving manipulation. I replied, inviting him to spend a week with me in the summer, without his parents, just the 2 of us, getting to know the ocean, building memories that are just ours. This morning, as I was watering the bougainvillea that have grown spectacularly in my garden, because plants also bloom when no one is stepping on them, I received an unexpected call. It was a woman from Ohio who had read about my story in a news article. Her daughter had left her penniless to buy a house, and now she wanted to know if it was too late to reclaim her dignity at 79. It's never too late, I told her. As long as you're breathing, you have the right to choose how you want to be treated. We talked for an hour. By the end of the conversation, she was crying, but not from sadness. She was crying with relief, from knowing she wasn't crazy, that her feelings of being abused were valid, that she had the right to demand respect, even from her own children. That night, as I poured my daily glass of wine on the terrace while seagulls flew over the sea that is now my daily horizon, I understood that my story hadn't ended. It had just begun. For 70 years, I had been the Grace others needed. A selfless mother, an obedient wife, a complacent grandmother. Now I was simply Grace, a woman who had learned that true love never requires the annihilation of the one who gives it. My children may never understand what they did wrong. They may continue to believe they were victims of my senile selfishness, instead of acknowledging they were perpetrators of my maternal kindness. It doesn't matter. Their understanding is no longer necessary for my happiness. Because happiness, I discovered, isn't begged for. It's built, with brave decisions, with firm boundaries, with the radical understanding that deserving respect is not a request you make of others, but a truth you give to yourself. Last week, I signed up for a painting class. My hands, which for decades had only been used to clean, cook, and work for others, now create. My first paintings are clumsy, but they are mine. Each brushstroke is an act of rebellion against the idea that older women only exist to serve others. I also started writing that book about the forgotten women of the civil rights movement. It turns out I have a lot to say about women who sacrificed everything and were erased from official history. I know the subject more intimately than any academic historian ever could. On weekends, I have visitors from the foundation. We sit on my terrace, share wine and cheese, and exchange stories of survival and rebirth. Some have recovered their stolen inheritances. Others have found the strength to say no for the first time in their lives. All have learned that old age is not synonymous with victimization. Maria, 68, bought a condo in Phoenix after recovering the money her sons had spent on luxury cars. Rose, 71, moved to Savannah to be near a cousin who treats her with genuine affection. Isabel, 76, is studying French because she always wanted to visit Paris, but her family told her it was an unnecessary expense at her age. We have all learned that it is never too late to rescue yourself. Yesterday, I found a letter in my mailbox. I immediately recognized Lucy's handwriting, that round script she had practiced for hours as a child, sitting at the kitchen table while I made dinner after getting home from work. Mom, I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything that happened, but I wanted you to know that I've been going to therapy. My therapist has helped me understand things about our relationship that I never saw before. She says it's possible we normalized behaviors that weren't normal. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry, and that if someday you want to meet the woman I'm becoming, I'll be here. The letter didn't ask for money. It didn't include elaborate justifications or grandiose promises of immediate change. It just acknowledged the harm done and took responsibility for it. It was a beginning. Small, fragile, but genuine. I replied with a postcard from Naples. On the back, I wrote, Lucy, when you're ready to know your mother as a person instead of a resource, come visit. But come alone, and come with no agenda. The ocean is beautiful any time of year. This morning, while I was having my coffee and toast with extra virgin olive oil, the good kind, the one I used to save for special guests who never came, I realized something extraordinary. I didn't miss my old life. I didn't miss the family Sundays where I pretended to be happy while my children planned how to use my next sacrifice. I didn't miss the phone calls that only came when they needed something from me. What I had lost was an illusion. What I had gained was a real life. I'm 75 now. My hair is platinum blonde with purple highlights that scandalize the conservative ladies at the Naples farmers market. My nails are red like blood, like passion, like the rage that saved me from a living death. I drive a Mini Cooper convertible because I can, and because I want to feel the Gulf breeze on my new face. Every morning I wake up not knowing exactly what I'll do that day, and that uncertainty that once terrified me now excites me, because it means my life belongs to me. Some nights, when the stars shine over the water like diamonds scattered on black velvet, I toast alone on my terrace, to Dad, who taught me that I deserve respect, and to myself, for finally learning how to give it. The wine tastes like freedom, like justice, like dignity, like the future. And now I ask you, who have listened this far? Have you ever experienced something like this? Or do you know someone who is going through a similar situation? Tell me in the comments. Your story could help someone else find the strength to say enough. And if this story has touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so this message can reach someone who needs to hear it. Because we all deserve to live with dignity, no matter how old we are.